So we are going to start with this session today. And this session is called Energy Innovation and Technology, Consumer Engagement and Data. So today we have 4 excellent presenters and presentations on topics. So we have Neil Horrocks from the University of Queensland presenting on Project Shield, a novel approach to data for networks. Then we have a Martin Egan from the Institute for Sustainable Future, presenting a customer-first approach to the energy transition. Then we have Martin Shaw from Australian National University, presenting on the neighborhood batteries and virtual power plants provide better peak demand management per kilowatt hour compared to household batteries. And to conclude, we have Penelope Crossley from the University of Sydney, discussing on why we need better regulation for the end-of-life renewable technologies and case study on lithium batteries. Probably you're already familiar with how we run this session. So each presenter have 10 minutes and then following by 5 minutes for Q&A. So if people have any question, please just come up to the microphone, because this is also an online and people is also hearing online. I think that's all from my side. So join me to welcome Professor Neil Horrocks, who is the director of the UK Centre for Energy Data Innovation, which undertakes research using near real-time big data from low-voltage electricity networks. Key research areas include network data infrastructure, network management using big data, and network intelligence from big data, as well as visualization of energy data for individuals and industry professionals. So, welcome now.
Thanks, Jason. Wow, hard to go up on stage after Danny. He was pretty much a knockout, wasn't he? Sort of got everyone going. I feel like he should be the last one for the day. But anyway, here we go. So I want to talk to you about Project Shield. Project Shield is a collaborative project between industry and research partners that's seeking to look at the challenges that are occurring on our low voltage networks as a result of customer energy resources. We don't have a lot of smart meter data where we are in Queensland and in a lot of our networks. So we're looking at what data is available and how we could go about using that data to create some visibility of the hosting capacity that's available on neighbourhood networks moving forward. It's a $5.7 million project, and we've got some funding from the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, and they've been really helpful in driving this project forward. It's due to complete by the middle of this year. We'd hoped to be finished earlier, but COVID and climate change has had a big impact on the networks and our ability to get to the networks and get things going on. Our partners are Luceo, and some of you may know Luceo under a different name, Redback Technologies, who are an inverter manufacturer. This is a spin-off of theirs who do a lot of IoT devices. We have GridCube, who are spun out of University of Queensland, and they've got some really, really exciting state estimation software that they've developed. We've got the Networks of Energy Queensland, which is the Ergon network in North Queensland, and the Energix network in Southern Queensland, the Network of Essential Energy, and the University of Queensland through the Centre for Energy Data Innovation. The background is pretty straightforward. Lots of solar. I think in Queensland we're now at 3 or 4 houses out of every 10 have solar. So really starting to get some high density there. And in fact, one of our trial areas at one stage, the number was up to 8 out of the 10 houses had solar and batteries in that location. And so it's starting to become a real problem for integration for the network up there, and they're looking at a whole lot of different things around dynamic limits. But you really need to understand what's happening in the networks, and network understanding requires data. As I said, no smart meters. We've got 30% as a result of solar going in up there, but a lot of that data doesn't come back in anywhere near real time to be useful. And a lot of the data around power quality is not really being captured at the moment. So we're looking for something that will fill the gap until we have a full rollout of smart meters. Our assumptions when we moved into this project around 2019 were that visibility was the big challenge for networks, and although visibility was a challenge, there was actually lots of data sitting latent in the low voltage networks, in our neighbourhood networks, some of it in front of the meter, some of it behind, and it could be and should be feasible, and when I say feasible, technically feasible, legally feasible and commercially feasible to gain access to some of those data sources. And if we can capture data in sufficient quantity and quality, then we may be able to calculate the dynamic limits of the network to a level of confidence that we may be able to understand what hosting capacity is available. And if we can get the right level of confidence, then networks may consider in the way they operate the networks and the way they plan networks to make positive changes that will reduce the upward pressure on our network charges. So the project took part in is taking part in 2 phases. Phase 1 is let's see what's on the network right now. So identify all of the data options that are out there at the moment, try and get hold of them and work our way through those hurdles, collect and integrate that data onto a single platform and create a single data stream. And I'll talk about the challenges there in a minute. And then use that incomplete data set to estimate what's happening on the network, and then show that to the networks and verify and get feedback from them on what they think is happening there. Some of the outcomes were that we found that smart meter data and network-owned systems are probably the most accessible, obviously, and available, but there are other data sources out there. Some of them are limited in availability and some of them are limited in value, but they're there. There was not a lot of real-time data out there. We'd hoped to find more real-time data, but the business case for collecting and backhauling real-time data is still not there for a lot of people who are collecting data out in our neighbourhoods. And we did find that there was some pretty poor quality data out there, and again I'll talk about that more in a minute. So we've done stage 1 and we've created some visibility of the network and found some really interesting things, and now we've moved into stage 2, and that is about expanding geographically to see if we can scale what we're doing and to install additional sensors so that we can fill out, not to 100%, but continue to add data points until we get to a place where we feel we're getting a reasonable level of confidence in our results, and then assess the value of the location of those data sets, the value of the latency of the data coming in, and the value of the data quality. So we expect when we finish this, probably by the middle of the year, that we will have a view on a new data-driven solution that networks could use to maybe delay investment in augmentation and reduce the cost for consumers in the longer term. That we will have a solution that can be used by networks to develop a new data strategy, and we can start to advise people on data quality and data latency and options moving forward, so that the networks can take more advantage of what we're doing, of what they could do, I should say. So the data sources when we started that we thought we may have a chance of getting hold of included smart meters, and we, for this project, are operating inside the envelope of the networks, which gives us the advantage of being able to see that smart meter data. There was obviously data coming in from inverters, battery systems and EV chargers, and we wanted to get hold of that. We expected to see home energy management systems on the neighbourhood networks, IoT devices like watt watchers and solar analytics that have big fleets of data out there, NBN, who collect a lot of voltage data from the networks, as well as transformer monitoring and network IoT devices. And those IoT devices are in front of the meter, and a few of the networks are now starting to install them in specific areas through their networks. We considered there was different ways we might be able to access that that data. We knew we would run into a range of latencies and a range of qualities. What we found when we got out there was smart meters were reasonably prominent, and we could get hold of that data pretty easily. And even though they're not complete data sets, our trial areas where we had a lot of CER installed meant that there was a lot of smart meter data out there, and we could get hold of that, albeit with some restrictions. We also got some good inverter data. Not a lot of batteries in our trial areas. We did get some. There was some barriers to getting hold of some of this data just from a legal perspective, and that became a bit of a challenge. Home energy management systems, we didn't find a lot of HEMS in our area. There are some around, but the ones that we did find were really difficult to access that data, to find someone who's willing to talk to us about the data and share that data. Watt watchers and solar analytics, as I said, they've got really big fleets, but that's across the 10 million data points or connection points on the NEM, which meant in our trial areas they weren't ubiquitous. There was 1 or 2 or 3, and the cost of retrieving that data at times could be quite expensive. NBN has a lot of data. As you can imagine, their whole business model relies on having power through their network, and so they collect power quality continually on their network, and they were very pleased to be part of our project. Transformer monitoring was available to us in the IoT devices that Lucio has installed on the Energex and Ergon networks at some quantity, were also available to us. The Lucio devices, the transformer monitoring and the smart meters were predominantly the key data sources we used, with some others like NBN coming in to fill in the gaps. This is just a really quick rundown of what we thought we would do when we started. We could see these devices in the field coming into our cloud, where we would validate the data, store it, and then send it to the state estimation program. That capacity envelope would come back to us where we could visualise it for the networks. In the end, we didn't get the real-time data simply because it just wasn't there. So what did we learn? We learnt that there's limited but enough usable data in the network to do something, and we're working on proving just how much, what the level of confidence is that we can garner from that data. There are some challenges getting access from some of the people who've got data, and some of those are perceived and some of them are actual. I think the data strategy that ESB is putting together will really help clear the air, because I think some of the barriers that were put in front of us we could have resolved given enough time. Every type of data has a significant amount of work required to integrate it into the data stream, and so for some of the data points it just wasn't worth doing the integration because there just wasn't a lot of it. It was going to take a lot of time. It just didn't make sense for us. We talked about real-time data. Data quality, interestingly, is a problem, and it's understandable, I guess, because a lot of the data that we were chasing was not designed to be used for the purpose that we wanted it for. And I guess the people who were collecting that data never thought about other markets for that data, but in time I think that'll fix itself. What we have found is the location in the neighbourhood where the data's coming from, the type of customer that the data's coming from, the latency. These are all important and can provide information on high value data points for us. We're continuing our deeper dive, putting more data points on the network and rerunning all our estimations with increased to identify what's happening with the levels of confidence. We're also going to build a virtual simulator to help network planners understand the best locations on a feeder to put their own data points if they want to collect data for what they're doing. We're going to improve the data platform to make sure it can integrate as many of the data points that we have got hold of, and we'll summarise our findings and share them later in the year. So that's me done. Thank you.
We have time for one or two questions.
Just a really quick one. What's the level of the data for the NBN? Is that household level at each modem? You've got voltage?
It depends. So if you've got fibre to the node, or fibre to the house, then we've got data at that point. But if it's to the box in the street, then we've got it to that point. But the state estimation, it doesn't need full data points. So if it's out in the street, it's just another data point close to the power pole where they're connected. Hey, Gabrielle.
Thanks, Neil. All sounds like really exciting progress. Really interested in obviously real time is the ideal, best case world, but have you looked at, day behind and the like, and what the difference would be in terms of the complexity of integrating all the data and what you would need to make that happen? Because many years ago when I talked to Essential, they were saying we don't need real-time data as long as it's like 24 hours past and we've got reasonable forecasting abilities, then that will be sufficient and we don't actually necessarily need that real-time response.
I think, and so Essential are part of what we're doing, and I think they're right. For a lot of what we're doing, unless there's big swings in climate, then the envelope's not changing day by day. So if we've got fairly constant temperature, we can get a sense of what's going to happen over the next couple of days in the envelopes that we're creating. It's where temperature is fluctuating, that real time probably becomes much more important. But hopefully we can give you some more answers on that when we finish doing this second bit of analysis that we're doing. Great. Okay, thank you.
Sorry. Yeah, the next presenter is Martin Egan, who has had a long career in innovation, disruption, and design lead development, working in media, finance, publishing, and education. After decades in digital product leadership, he recently spent several years working with a solar tech startup, helping the Australian public to understand and engage with opportunities on renewable and sustainable energy. He's now undertaking a PhD research into the role of that customer-centric startup processes could play in an energy transition where customers are owners of grid assets. Yep. Welcome, Martin.
Move this up. I'm very tall, but I'm also very loud, so I probably don't need it. So as Justin said, I have a background in digital product. Basically, I've worked in advertising, media, and then my sister Renata tricked me into helping out solar analytics. They were launching the PV tracking that is part of looking at data collection, but they were great with the PV and great with the engineering, but the digital and the people part, they need some help. So having worked with them for 3 years as their product director, I'm now bringing that knowledge of both PV and the customer and design thinking and product thinking to Race 2030 basically. This is the PhD I pitched for Race 2030. How can the customer first and iterative approaches of successful Australian and international startups be applied to help the energy transition? We've just had, how do I click forward? That one? That one? That one. As we've just had Danny's presentation and Megan's presentation, Megan was actually one of my supervisors or industry group of my first year of PhD so far. I'm looking at the way those innovation and startup techniques that Danny's talking about. How can we get this moving in the energy industry? The obvious piece. The energy industry is finding itself in times of enormous upheaval and with specific disruption arising from their customer base. And that's my meat and bones here. New technology has meant the loss of ownership of energy assets, and also there's the general philosophical challenge to the energy industry. My point being they are both of them are coming from their customer base. The customers are beginning to take an active role in their energy management and demanding accountability for the industry. Is it down here? Oh, I can't read it here. Yeah, that's better. And the objective of my research project is to ask if and how energy customers are being listened to, and how their voice can shape the energy's future. So yeah, this was the key question, as I've said before, and I broke it down into sub-questions to take great chunks of it and dig into it. I want to investigate the recent implementation of customer research in innovation projects in the energy industry, both locally and globally. I looked at the implementation of design thinking and product practice in those startups, both globally and locally, and also then it all led me to a review of customer first practices, and that became a particular focus on the AMO VPP demonstration that's been going on. Something in here that I want to really call out. Actually, I'll bring up later. I first need to explain some terms. Users versus consumers. I'm really heartened to see that in a lot of the presentations earlier today, the term consumer has been used. A lot of the academic stuff I've read, especially the transition theory stuff, we talk about the user. What I'm looking for, but what my research is looking at is that particular point where a person in the public makes a decision to buy, makes a decision to engage with their energy. They're buying solar, they're buying batteries, they're buying an EV to engage. It's a consumer inflection point. Once they have it, they will then become the user, and there's more to discover there. But I in particular are looking at this idea of when a general public becomes a consumer of their energy or the consumption of their energy becomes much more personal, a inflection point. Design thinking and product practice. I'll be using these terms a lot. I'm not sure how many people understand what all that means. It's all the stuff, again, that Danny was talking about. These new practices that are business and production practices that have come out of Silicon Valley. The easiest way to do it, I was talking to someone out in one of the meetings, in one of the networking sessions. Agile, Lean, Scrum, these are production processes. They are, for decades, we've looked at project management, which is what often is referred to as waterfall, where you spend 6 months building up a massive brief. This is the huge thing we want to build. And then you spend 2 years building it, and then you'll launch it. Coming out of IT and out of disruption and innovation, 2 years is too late. About a year and a half too late. By the time you've done that 6 months of briefing, you're probably already out of date. Your code's out of date, your consumers moved on. Agile and Lean are processes to affect that, to change that. The easiest, I should have had a little picture, the easiest way to look at that, the metaphor that's most often used, is when a user, a customer says, I want to go from A to B faster. Waterfall would go, we'll build you a car, and spend 10 years building a car. Agile says, here's a skateboard. And then they come back 6 months later, how's it going with the skateboard? It's okay, I'm faster, but it's a bit scary. Here's a helmet, and we'll work on it. Come back 6 months later, how's it going? Helmet's great, not very quick. Here's a bicycle. Okay, helmet still works, keep going. Come back a year later, how are you going? I'm getting there, I'm feeling safer, but it's still slow. Here's a motorbike. Year after that, great, fast, bit scary, the whole balance thing, no worries. Here's a bicycle with 4 wheels. Here's your car. That idea. As you progress, you're constantly talking to your consumer, your user, and you're learning. Agile and Lean. If anyone ever talks to you about Agile and Lean, that's what that is. Design thinking is a spin-off of that, where in that about that, oh my God, 5 minutes. Okay, onward. Customer engagement. So these are the 3 parts of my question I broke down into. Customer engagement. In the research I found, traditional market practice still rules. It's about the money. We'll save you money. We'll save you money. And then there's whatever customer research occurs is often in retrospect, aftermarket. Again, classic market research, project management. But what they've been hearing is a very vocal audience about concerns about their role in energy. So I've found that the growing importance of the customer's perception of energy at all levels, at the market, at the retailer, and all the way up to ministerial and policy. Innovation practice, the dominance of internal problem solving at large scale. Again, the industry is still very much waterfall, not agile. Design thinking is occurring, but it's in niche, in the small innovation pieces. It's hard to fail fast, which is another agile term, when you're an essential service. So there's a big friction point there. Capital, again, working with Megan, capital VC at the moment is very technically based. They're looking for big industry technical problems because that's where money's at. Seeing in America and Germany and in England with Octopus, the mature markets are beginning to look at customer facing. Maturing markets. And finally, customer first. With all that research, I started looking at the idea of when customer first has been used, what happens? And we see success. We see success, the products are picked up, engaged with better, used better, but also challenges beyond that sale. Training the installers so they install it right. They're often very technical. And the idea that education beyond, it becomes a journey. The system of an engaged user or an owner goes beyond wiring it in. You have to keep the conversation going. So, and this is the big one, for me, I found an opportunity to study best practice in engaging customers in emerging. I'm going to quickly spin through this because I'm running out of time. The VPP demo stuff that AMO's been running has been my gold dust. It's really where the tyres hit the road. Public when shared ownership of grid assets are forcing the engagement, the public own the asset. We're seeing it everywhere, South Australia in particular. If we are curtailing them, we are pulling them together. And I'm hoping to see is both Project Symphony and Edge have both increased their sociological approaches. The reports are coming out soon. And my big call, the lesson learned here in VPP, in this customer engagement and the way you talk to your customer, will set the stage for launching home and battery, EV integration, and the electrify everything ideal. Here is our first point where where the industry really has to talk to the customer. And where I'm going next. With the growing number of energy assets in the hands of the consumers, what conversations are being had about the future energy? Will the customer be separated, included, or incorporated? How will their greatest concerns be addressed? And what will the energy industry do? Can they utilise these customer-centric methods into niche projects and their horizon plans? How can they include social responsibility and carbon accountability in their language? It's a subplot, which I don't have time to get into. The idea of literally the language of power has changed. My goal, an understanding of best practice and language for the energy transition. And I'll be looking at it in transition theory. It's an obvious comparison that it is a sociological and technological problems that are combined. And the latest transition theory agenda talked about the fact that they are in need of looking at transitions in practice in every day, the preferred new approach. We first discussed recent. This is how they expect us to move forward. We first discussed recent practice-oriented research on consumption and everyday life and the role of the users in transition process, and then address future directions. A lot of the sustainable transition theory literature now is talking about how do we engage with the user, how do we engage with the customer. I think that's it. Yep, that's it. Don't know how I went for time.
Time for 2 questions.
Any questions? Yep.
Hi, Martin. I think that's very interesting. It struck me that people use energy, but they also vote.
Yes.
And so they might seek to resolve a whole lot of their issues through the ballot box.
Yep.
And I'm kind of seeing that in Victoria, where the top issue was creating a state-based power company again. How do you integrate that as part of the solution? Because obviously a whole lot of it's going to be how they buy a battery and integrate it with the grid and solar and so on. But others will be, I don't like these problems, I want government to solve them. So I'd be very interested in how you're going to bring that into your research.
Well, and it's exactly one of the points I glossed quickly over was the idea that the customer's voice is being heard at all levels. In the research and in the reviews and in talking to some of the stakeholders, they're talking about the fact that Ausgrid is doing customer research, because they know the customer then talks to the minister, talks to the regulator, talks back to them. So it is. You're already seeing, and the role of the Energy Consumers Association will become larger and larger and larger for exactly this. We need to not only hear what they're saying, but again, the other thing I glossed over, how do we talk back to them? How does the energy industry, the regulators continue that conversation? Because for all too long, it's just been here. My favourite term, educated disinterest. Someone else brought up the question before about the bill. The energy industry used to just give this bill and it was literally you just shut up and pay your magic tax. You pay this money and you look at all the stuff you get. They've had no need to talk to them or listen to them. But now, with these two things pushing, as you say, the existential threat that everyone feels, and that existential threat is driving the interest, engagement. Right, I'll take a step. I'll buy the solar, I'll buy the battery, I'll buy the EV. Now you've got to listen to me. Now you've got to talk to me. It's that's the heart and soul of where I'm trying to dig into. Yeah.
Excellent. Great. Thank you.
Good topic,
Thank you.
Excellent topic. I
Okay.
think you're right. The work that you're doing here will be really good to inform our move into batteries and EVs. I think a really interesting thing I've noticed is the first 1 million installations in Australia took 12 years. Second million took 6 years. Third million took 3 years. Not everyone, but a big chunk of them got exactly what they paid for, that did what it said on the box, put it on the roof, and my bill disappears.
Yep.
That's given people confidence and agency, and I'd be really interested to just see someone start to think about how that empowers people to move much more quickly into their second and third energy infrastructure purchase. It's just a comment.
Oh yeah, and it's an interesting one there as well, because there was that halcyon days of, you bought it and the government gave you a ton of cash when you pump the energy back in. And again, working with solar analytics, there was this huge pause when that got pulled, and all of a sudden those numbers didn't quite add up. Those didn't, and I think, to your point, I think we're going to get a sudden acceleration again when batteries get cheaper, and all of a sudden, because at the moment even the solar quotes and all of these guys are like, batteries not quite make sense just yet. But when batteries get cheaper, when the gigafactories light up and the EVs, when they start going, okay, you can connect it in. A fantastic anecdote. I'm going to spend a little bit of time. Apparently, every Tesla is now built to house. Some guy pulled the Tesla apart to re-engineer it, and in doing so went, it's all here. He's built it all in. It's all just software locked because they Tesla don't want you wrecking their battery. And as soon as home energy management comes on, he'll just go, software upgrade, your Tesla's a battery.
There will be subscription.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, the next presenter is Marnie Shaw, who is a research leader in the Battery Storage and Grid Integration Program and Discipline Chair of System Engineering at the Australian National University. Her research program combines engineering and social research to design technology that supports the people power push towards a resilient, decarbonized, and distributed energy system. So welcome, Marnie.
Thank you for the introduction. Actually, this talk follows on extremely well from yours, so thank you, Martin, for this here. So firstly, this is a talk that was submitted by Dora Hay, and she couldn't be here today, unfortunately, so I'm presenting it on her behalf. Okay. So, as we all know from the AEMO ISP, most of our future battery storage will be on the distribution grid around our suburbs, and most of it will need to be coordinated and dispatchable. So we know that requires not just the technology, not just the network infrastructure, we need the markets, the regulations, the standards, innovative businesses. Most importantly, it needs us, and this is what we've just been hearing about. So it will be dependent on the choices that people make. So this is the research that we're doing in the Battery Storage and Grid Integration Program, looking at different options. So we're looking at household batteries, electric vehicles, and also we've been doing a lot of work around neighbourhood battery storage. So what we're doing is trying to understand the potential role that kind of mid-scale storage could play in our future energy system. So here on the right is an example of a community battery. This one is from Western Australia, where they're further ahead compared to the eastern states in terms of the rollout of neighbourhood battery storage. In our research that we have done over the past 4 or so years, we have heard that there's huge enthusiasm for this kind of storage. So talking about listening to what people want, they're really keen on the idea of it. This enthusiasm has been tapped into more recently by governments. So we saw last year the federal Labor included as part of their election policy platform. So they had a $200 million for 400 neighbourhood batteries. So now they were elected, that is being rolled out as we speak. Also state governments as well are very interested, in particular Victorian government with their neighbourhood battery initiative, which is $11 million. Some of that money funded some of our research. And then in the state election late last year, they also announced a further 100 neighbourhood batteries. So those will also be rolled out over the coming few years. So part of the reason for the enthusiasm in this kind of storage is the idea that it could increase solar hosting capacity, reduce emissions, build savings. This is what we hear the politicians talking about when they're announcing these policy ideas. For me and for our work, we're extremely interested and keen on testing that and seeing whether it's true and actually quantifying it. So that's the important work that we're trying to do at the moment. So we ask questions like these. Can neighbourhood batteries actually increase hosting capacity over and above household batteries and over above, or how does it compare to virtual power plants? Can they actually reduce emissions? Do they ever increase emissions? How do the different ownership and operation models impact those potential benefits that we're expecting to see from neighbourhood batteries? So I just wanted to show you some of our example results. So the way we do this work is that we run simulations of different types of battery storage. So we'll have like exactly the same total capacity of batteries, but we'll have it either as one single neighbourhood battery or a bunch of household batteries or coordinated household batteries, which is a virtual power plant. So for these example results, it's based on 100 houses, a total battery storage of 250 kilowatts, 500 kilowatt hours. The full details of these simulations are at the end of the slide deck, so you can go and have a look later or ask me about them. And then we look at the outcomes of the simulation. So we look at the economic impact. So how does that impact the households? How much money do they save or not save? How does it impact the battery owner? So is the neighbourhood battery owner actually making money out of this? We also look at the local energy management. So how do the different types of battery arrangements impact the demand management, the peak reduction, both for imports and exports out of the suburb? And we also look at the impact on emissions. So by that we mean the emissions associated with the aggregate electricity that suburb uses. So here are just some examples of results. So VPP is virtual power plant, neighbourhood battery, household battery, and no battery. And we can see both virtual power plant and neighbourhood battery reduce the maximum yearly import peak compared to household batteries that are not coordinated. And likewise for the total emissions, but with less of a reduction compared to household batteries. So I should say that these results obviously are dependent on a huge number of parameters that you can fiddle with and get different results. And most importantly, at this stage of the simulations, the virtual power plant is assumed to be perfect orchestration, perfect coordination, which is obviously not realistic. So we're at the moment working out how we can best include an imperfect coordination of batteries, which is what we would actually see with a virtual power plant. We're also really interested in how the benefits that we're expecting depend on how the battery is operated, and we see really huge impacts. So we look at different sort of operation models like this one, solar soak, where the batteries are kind of programmed to just maximise how much daytime solar they soak up. This one, which is the batteries are programmed to reduce the evening peak demand. This is a balance between, I'll go to this one. This one is revenue maximisation. We're just trying to make as much money as you can from the market. But this one is a balanced one where you're trying to make money, but also trying to help out the network by reducing peak demand. And what we often see with this balanced one is it's quite good outcomes. So that's definitely something that we would be promoting, and we do promote in the work that we do with the software that we're providing to neighbourhood battery providers. So what we have seen with our research so far, looking at really the technical and economic comparison between neighbourhood batteries and virtual power plants, they're likely to have fairly similar outcomes technically and economically. So what we really do know is that household preferences will be really key. And when it comes to household preferences, we know that trust is a huge issue. And we also know that we face big issues with trust in the energy industry. We have low levels of trust. So that was discussed this morning. It was 3 in 10, Lynn Gallagher said this morning, 3 in 10 householders don't believe, only 3 in 10 believe that the energy industry is acting in our interest. So very kind of concerning low levels of trust in us as an energy industry. Hopefully you can help with that, Martin. So this, obviously the household preferences, the social aspect is really something that is central to our research. So we put that at the centre of our kind of technical and engineering work and try to think about what are the engineering solutions that will fit with what householders actually want, what they're actually expecting from the technology, what they want from the technology. So when I work with the social researchers in our team, and if you want more, I encourage you to look into the work that they do, which can be found here at bskip.com. Our social research team is led by Hedda Ranson-Cooper, who I work really closely with. And some of the things that I've learnt from her are that financial compensation won't overcome poor trust or perception. Distrust in relation to the existing energy market is likely to affect perceptions of policy reforms and business models. There is concern over privacy and fear of someone taking control of their energy system, so that's really relevant for the virtual power plants and something that we've heard as well when we go out and speak with community. And also there are frustrations with poor compliance and enforcement. And I was interested to see in AEMO's latest electricity statement of opportunities, the ISU, that they discuss this explicitly. So they said that there remains a large degree of uptake and orchestration uncertainty, relying on homeowners to both install battery systems and to sign up for these to provide network services. So just in conclusion, our role, we have a really important role, I feel, as researchers in evaluating and comparing the different battery storage options. We've been working together with our funding partners, the Victorian Government, DELP, on the neighbourhood battery impact evaluation framework to try to really evaluate these benefits and also the risks. And what's really crucial to our work is that we include the social, so that we have socio-technical research that is designing the energy storage for our future suburbs. So thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Scott Dwyer from ISF. You mentioned business models and trust. So from your research, have you found who communities would trust to deliver community batteries? Is it the retailer? Is it DNSP? Is it somebody else?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Hedda, who's the social researcher, went out to speak to people all around Australia, and that was one of the things that she was interested to sort of learn. And people said that they would trust, interestingly, local councils to operate the neighbourhood batteries. They also said they had a lot of trust in academic researchers, which is nice to hear. But yeah, so that's interesting, because we also do a lot of work working with different people who might actually buy and operate the batteries, and councils so far are not interested. It's quite a jump for them to move into this space, and I think they know that there's interest in their communities, but I think we've got a bit of a way to go. And certainly there's no kind of off-the-shelf model for them to say, okay, we'll put this in. But yeah, that's what people told us.
Yeah, and retailers, do you know where they come? Because I know from some of our research, previous research in the UK, they found people didn't really trust retailers, but they wanted them to deliver energy services because it's part of their remit. Yeah,
that's a really interesting one. So as you know, there's kind of low trust in retailers, but I can think of one retailer which is a non-profit in Victoria called Indigo Power, and they're looking a lot in this space, and they've already rolled out a community battery, and they're rolling out more. So I think there's a lot of trust in that kind of organisation. I think where the issue is when people are making money out of it, there's this question, which is extremely valid, who's making money from my solar?
And it's very untransparent as well, isn't it? It's very opaque.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I can see that it could work if it was very transparent. Like, this is how much money we're making, this is how much you're making, it's all like on the table. But I think there are challenges there for sure.
Right, thanks.
I'm Matt Pello, Endeavour Energy. Marnie, thanks for your presentation. I'm spending a lot of time at the moment working on that Commonwealth Community Battery Program for us internally, so really value your insights. I have a lot of questions actually, but I'll limit myself to one for the moment. If I recall correctly, the announced title in the printed program was something along the lines of looking at neighborhood batteries as compared to behind-the-meter batteries in terms of how effectively they manage peak demand per kilowatt hour. I gather that's per kilowatt hour of installed battery capacity, if I understand correctly. So I was just interested to draw you out a little bit more on that. If you can comment briefly on that. Under what conditions is that true? How is that measured? What's the right way to think about whether a kilowatt hour of battery capacity installed at my house on a power wall versus in my neighborhood community battery up the street is more performs better technically in terms of grid operation, and is more economically efficient at delivering optimized grid performance.
I think one really key thing is that when you have a shared battery that's in front of the meter, a community battery, you're charging and discharging according to the aggregate load. So you've got that natural diversity in how it's charging. So if I'm generating a lot of solar but my neighbour isn't, but then together we've got a more flat load. So what that means is that you need less kilowatt hours of storage per house if you're sharing storage
because of the averaging across the neighbourhood.
Exactly, yeah. It's on the order of you need about half. So that is a really key thing to consider and to look into further. Then it also depends on a lot of other things like tariffs, and the network tariff is a really huge one that you would be spending a lot of time thinking about in your space. So all of those other things have impact as well, but we can kind of, work on those and recommend sort of solutions for getting the optimal outcome. But I think the key thing is that diversity that means that we need less battery storage. It's a really important one.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. The next presenter is Associate Professor Penelope Crossley, who is an expert in the complex legal issues associated with the energy transition, including renewable energy and energy storage law and electricity market governance. She is known for her sustained engagement with industry stakeholders and for developing recommendations that have been directly adopted into law, international policy documents, and consumer guides. Previously, she worked as an international project finance lawyer and a global in-house counsel for BP Alternative Energy. This commercial and practical legal experience informs her research and teaching, ensuring that she focuses on real-world problems and identifies innovative commercial solutions that can be easily translated and applied. Welcome, Penelope.
So I'm quite conscious I'm standing in between here and a drink, so I'll be quick. I think one of the really cool things about renewable energy, and when we're talking about renewable energy law, is historically we've been really focused on incentives. We've been really focused on rollout. And what I'm now trying to pivot us towards is thinking more about end of life. We haven't had legal frameworks thinking about end of life, and this has caused a huge number of issues. And I'm going to talk today about a case study that we're currently looking at on lithium-ion batteries. And one of the reasons why we're so focused on lithium-ion batteries at the moment is lead-acid batteries. It makes economic sense to recycle, to recover. We're very comfortable with it. They're a fairly easy technology. Lithium-ion batteries, complex chemistries, they can all be different. They're different sizes. They can be embedded in things. There was a fire a couple of weeks ago caused by a shopping trolley getting crushed, because who knew, you think about it logically, they have little batteries that create the brakes to stop you pushing it too far out, and nobody realised and it got crushed. One of the current major waste management companies is losing a $550,000 truck a month due to this problem. And we've also already had the suggestion, it's currently in a coronial inquest, that there's actually been a death linked to a battery fire in a child up in Queensland. So this is a really big issue. Currently, we're estimating that up to 90% of kind of consumer batteries go into the rubbish. It's a larger source of hazardous household waste, and so this is what I'm currently studying. So this project is partly funded through New South Wales Boosting Business Innovation Program seed funding, and I'm working with industry partners, so the Australian Battery Recycling Initiative, Battery Pollution and LCC Asia Pacific. And we're also thinking about how we can take these batteries and make them into new products and recover them, and what those legal issues will be. So our research has really been focused on 5 key types of case studies. You've got the end-of-life lithium batteries, and the reason why what we've found is that with mixed batteries, you can basically collapse categories 1 and 2 together, because the second there's any lithium in a battery, we're going to assume it's a lithium battery, because that's the most risky proposition. So you always default to that. Large batteries I've discovered are less of an issue than I thought they were going to be. And the reason for that is most of them go back to the OEM, the original equipment manufacturer, and they have an economic incentive to deal with the problem. And so the big Teslas, less of an issue. It's being handled. Category number 4 is a disaster zone, because there's no uniform way a battery gets damaged. Once a battery is damaged, you can't be confident that the battery is all exhausted. So for example, if we have a fire, say we've got an EV fire out on the road out there, the fire brigade gets called. They have to get the hazardous materials team out. They have a legal obligation to tell you as the vehicle owner that you've got a damaged battery, but they won't actually take the battery with them for fairly obvious reasons, because they don't want the fire truck catching on fire. You're standing there as an EV owner out on the road going, what do I do with it? And one of the key problems that we've discovered is that 85% of all lithium battery fires are coming from damaged or defective batteries. But moreover, there's not even a uniform way that you handle a damaged battery. So for example, some people put them in water. Well, if you put a damaged battery into water, you've then got lithium leaking into water. Now I've got a water disposal problem as well as a lithium disposal problem, and just deeply problematic. And I can tell you, if I'm an EV owner and I'm told I've got to deal with my damaged battery, that's probably okay, because somebody will come along and will probably help me with it. If it's a damaged laptop battery, chances are that's going straight into landfill, and that's likely to cause a fire. The 5th category is legally fascinating, repurposing it into secondary products, and we heard about people pulling apart their power walls. We know this is happening. From how do you actually ensure consumer protection? What actually happens there? How do you actually set up a system whereby you get consumer trust, You're going to need a whole testing regime. How do you actually then think about who bears liability? Is this going to be like the oil industry where we'll set up trailing liability for the battery? So that if I on-sell the battery onto a secondary party, I'll still maintain some liability in the event that it fails or is damaged or it needs to be recycled. So there's a whole stack of really interesting problems here that we're trying to deal with. I think out of that category, those categories, the one that is the most problematic is the damaged. Everything else we can kind of manage, but that damaged category is the one that there's no easy solutions to. So we've been having industry workshops, we've been working with the state, the Commonwealth, across the industry, even down to the scrap metal companies, because they get people coming in and presenting them. And if they don't actually have a way of recycling them, how do they even transport it to somebody who can? Because then you're triggering dangerous goods transportation rules and even international law. So this whole area, legally a mess. And it's just, yeah, I can't tell you how much of a legal mess this is. And part of it is that we've dealt with all the regulation has been very piecemeal. We kind of deal with dangerous goods, we're comfortable with dangerous goods, so we deal with that. Or we're comfortable with lead acid recycling, so we have rules around that are very clear. But then you find that there are actually fairly large gaps and fairly large loopholes. So one of the gaps that we're dealing with at the moment is something is only waste if it then has no value to the current user of the product. If I have a spent battery, but somebody is willing to purchase that battery for the purpose of putting it into a secondary product, is that then waste? And there's been litigation around that in Victoria. And if it is not waste, then arguably I don't actually trigger a lot of the hazardous waste laws, and then we've got a fairly big fat loophole that then makes it much, much easier to transport, but it doesn't remove the risk. So these are some of the issues that we're talking about and trying to get some harmonisation on. So we've been trying to identify the various risks and talk about what are the priority levels, how could you actually mitigate it, do you actually need to control it? So do you need to say, look, batteries just need to be banned from landfill, which I would suggest is a fairly low threshold thing that we should have done yesterday. How do you then manage and mitigate the response? Because what we're really concerned about here, and you'll see the number one priorities are fires. The fires are what we're really worried about. But there are also a number of other risks. And part of it is that this is really costly, because the second I have a battery and I move it across a state border, I then have got two different lots of laws, two different lots of compliance processes. It's just a nightmare. And some states put on place caps. There was an issue in Victoria 2 years ago where they changed one of their laws to say that there was a zero threshold, triggering the laws down there around lithium-ion batteries. What it meant was that the RACV vans were then subject to the same regulation as your lead smelters, and the compliance costs that associated with that, because they didn't have a materiality threshold. So I'm sorry I'm not being the most cogent, but this is a massive issue. I'm still on leave and I'm still worrying about it, but not as well as I probably should be. So there's a whole range of reasons here that this is a really complex area of laws. You've got this layering of international law, different state laws, you've got planning laws, environmental laws, even things as silly as one of the largest holders of batteries at the moment is Bunnings. Bunnings hold huge amounts of batteries. Also e-bike sellers have a lot of batteries on site. Now, they're not subject to the same battery storage laws and collection laws as somebody who is actually a collection point, because they're zoned as a retail entity under the Planning Act, which therefore means that you can actually, I couldn't put a battery collection point, arguably in many Bunnings locations around the country, but we're quite happy to have a Bunnings there. The fire risk is arguably very similar, particularly if they take back spent batteries. So there's some really, really interesting areas here, but it's also an area where we haven't thought about it in this consistent, holistic way. And because of that, we have a lot of challenges coming up in this space. And we're trying to actually go back to basics and say, if we were to create a new regulatory framework for this from scratch, that is efficient, that makes sense for industry, that makes sense for the consumers, what would that actually look like? So the most serious risk for us at the end of life is fire, and the primary cause of that is are damaged batteries. All of these issues get amplified in regional and remote areas due to limited technical skills and transportation costs. The more remote you are from a major centre, the more costly it obviously is to recycle. But even things like if you're out in remote central Australia, you can't actually transport different types of hazardous waste together. So the hazardous waste that is your paint has to be transported separately from the hazardous waste that is your batteries, at which point the transportation costs are mammoth. So these are some of the challenges. And basically it's all completely inconsistent, really problematic, most problematic for lithium. There's a lot to worry about. So where we're working on at the moment, industry and government have said to us these are the key priorities for them. Safety, sustainability, consistency, trying to focus on circular economy and encouraging recycling is really important, particularly around critical minerals. Longer term financial sustainability, but we need to also enhance consumer education and incentivise the development of safer battery chemistry. So people are talking about sodium-ion batteries. And we should also incentivise people not to do dangerous things like dumping damaged batteries into your landfill or transporting them in your car, or there's a whole range of things you just shouldn't do. So these are the areas that people have said to us they think ought to be regulated, but they also said to us there are some areas that they thought ought not to be regulated. And one of those is around insurance protection. And I'll flag this to you just as a parting thought. This is an area where the insurance industry has not been spending a lot of time thinking about. That's going to change and is already changing. The second that changes, if you're now saying to people, if you have a battery on your household, you will pay a higher insurance premium if you're in a bushfire zone. This is something that we're going to be discussing, I think, a lot in the next coming years. And also around consumer protection with secondary batteries. So this is an area I'm still working on. I'm really excited about it. We're also working on it in terms of solar. Solar is basically solar waste is kind of on an exponential curve. From about this year, we hit about that 15-year recycling point. So very happy to talk to people, collaborate with people, keep working this space. So thank you. Questions?
I'm glad we're having a drink after.
Yeah, somebody lost their, I forget what type of car, Bentley. There was a Bentley that was caused by a e-scooter fire over in Manly just before Christmas. They were worried about the Bentley. I was worried about the fact that they lost pretty much most of their house, but you know. Even things like this is starting to affect strata laws in the US. So, for example, you're not allowed to store e-scooters underneath flats because they're worried about a Grenfell type situation.
Simple question, just so everyone can hear. Is this problem only for batteries that still have charge in? Like, can fires happen from batteries that are dead, that have no charge left in them?
So batteries that you think are dead
Yep.
can have up to 10% charge in them still, which is why they drill into them. So that's part of the problem, is how do you actually satisfy yourself that a dead battery is genuinely dead? And most of the batteries that we're seeing on the market actually have, as part of their battery management system, they actually have control that actually limits them going down to completely dead batteries. But I say that as a lawyer and not as an engineer.
Is there anyone doing it right? Is there anyone out there, Europe, England, UK, who are setting us an example?
So Europe is really interesting. So Europe's doing a lot of work in this space, as is the US, but both of them have far greater economies of scale. So the challenge that we've got as Australia is that we're prohibited by the Basel Convention from exporting a lot of this waste. So we're going to have to deal with it domestically, but I'd argue strategically we want to be dealing with it domestically anyway because of the critical minerals involved and security of supply. So if we solve it here, we solve it for a whole stack of smaller countries or countries that can't be part of that European conglomerate.
We actually now jump to a joint Q&A session, so please the presenters can sit down in front for just, I think, 7 minutes for more questions. And also, please, feel free to jump and start with the questions.
Hello again. Just a quick question for Penelope. Sorry to slide this one in. Great discussion. Delighted to hear about this work happening. I work for an organization that may soon own a lot of batteries. So from that perspective, and being from a technical background myself, very interested on the engineering side, but from the asset owner side, that is not yet but will soon be probably a battery owner. Looking ahead to some of the issues that you have just outlined in terms of the need for harmonized guidance around safety management and disposal and such, just in the near term, like 6, 12, 18 months, what is the outlook for some, beta version of a consolidated guide to regulations or best practice outlook, for the organizations that are not, NEON managing hundreds of megawatts, but for whom this will soon become a material issue?
So we've been working with the Commonwealth and the state. So we will actually have a guide out apparently by June 2023.
Is that news to you?
June? Yep, June. So by June we should have something in place that we're going to start really pushing quite heavily on. And then that's just focused on New South Wales. We're then focusing on a national roadmap across all of the different battery chemistry types, focused on risk-based regulation around this. So we should be able to help.
Great. Hope we'll be in touch.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other question? Yeah, perfect.
Graham Palmer, Monash University. Another battery question. What's the hope for product stewardship of batteries?
So product stewardship tends not to work, which I know is a really controversial view. And as a lawyer, normally we have a reputation for saying we need to regulate. This is actually an area where we are going to need to regulate, because product stewardship works when you have a sector where we don't have kind of 25% turnover like we do in solar, where you don't have phoenixing, where you have everyone being a best practice operator. Product stewardship also works where there is industry will to get it. And the federal government's been trying to get up a product stewardship scheme around batteries for the last 6 years unsuccessfully. So I'm really sceptical that actually a voluntary scheme in this space will work, because you'll have too many people who don't join that scheme. And I think that these problems are so serious that actually you just need something that's uniform, that's regulated, that you can hold people to account for. And also to incentivise that we need to move into this circular economy. And that's not going to happen without some economic support, I don't think. But again, that's controversial.
Thank you. Okay, Yep.
I'm going to diversify the questions. Renata Egan, the University of New South Wales and Solar Analytics. So I was going to ask you, Neil, with your data platform that you're developing, so Solar Analytics started with a data message, that is, tell consumers what's going on with their data, but with the vision of actually making that data more widely available to answer the question that is always asked, that we can't make these decisions and it's not informed because we don't have the data. So we've got some data, it's live, it has been live, less of it is live now because of the costs. There is a significant cost, and if nobody else wants to share that cost, then we can't sustain it either. So we all hear that data is important, data's king, this is how we're going to make these decisions. You've got a data platform now that you're taking data on board. I heard from your assessment that you plan to grow that and to sustain it. do you have customers for that data who are prepared to pay you so that you can sustain it? Like, do you have a business model around the data platform that will make it work? Because for us was one of the biggest challenges, was trying to get somebody, despite them all saying they wanted it, to actually pay for it.
So there's two answers to that question. One is the research data that we're using. We hope to de-identify and make it available to researchers, and we hope to build more data for researchers to help them. As far as a commercial platform, it's probably not the remit of this project, but it is definitely an opportunity. It is entirely a big opportunity, and a lot of the people who have the data can't see the value in that data just yet, and I think there is a long way to go in the development of some sort of data mart, particularly for people like networks who could use it a lot, and there are other organisations who could use it a lot. So I think definitely there's an opportunity there. Certainly it's not something that we're pursuing from a commercial point of view.
Along that question as well, I might have missed it at the beginning of your presentation, but how deep are you looking into the data? Are you looking at grid and grid voltage? Are you looking at house per house usage? And are you then looking at disaggregation of that data into Netflix when the TV went on? And did you say Netflix before?
No, NBN.
Okay.
So we've got data at a network level, so at the transformer level or the substation level. We also have household data. We're not going to disaggregate that data down below just the voltage, the active and reactive power at the connection point.
Okay. Cool.
Thank you. Yep. No worries. Yeah, we have time for one.
Amy Gui from Climate Centre, Monash Sustainable Development Institute. Thanks for sharing 4 very different challenges. I guess in a sense they all require technology, policy support and viable business model. So in a perfect world, I guess who would you bring on board to collaborate, and basically what role do you think these stakeholders should play to actually help to solve your challenges?
Start at this end. Volunteer. You just coughed. You volunteered.
Yeah, just joking. But, no, start at the other end.
Okay.
I'm still thinking about it.
We'll collaborate with anyone who's interested because the problems are so vast and there are so many stakeholders involved. It's going to need a really holistic approach. So I'm working with engineers, I'm working with environmental scientists, I'm working with waste specialists, I'm working with regulators, and I would love to have a conversation with anyone in this room who's interested in this research.
To build on the research that we're doing, it'd be ideal to collaborate with more networks because it would give us more different contextual look at various parts of neighbourhoods. I also think manufacturers of a lot of the equipment, I'd love to work more closely with them. Some of the manufacturers just wouldn't even entertain discussing. They're more focused on selling equipment than selling the data. A lot of the people who retail and collect the data locally because they are agents for an international operator, again, are very scared of the legal liabilities of participating, so I'd love to collaborate with them. And we'd love to collaborate individually with households that have got data that they're willing to share. So I think there's a great opportunity to do that more in the future.
As a PhD student, I'm starting small and escalating as fast as I can. So Solar Analytics is my sponsor for my PhD, and it's a great sponsor for me because they have been doing customer research and have a big data set behind them and quite a nice customer
and a good
set.
data set.
A good data set. Getting worse, unfortunately, now that we're cutting costs, but didn't say that. Or left, it's right. Again, part of the race was part of the race structure is great because for my first year I had to have an industry reference group. So I've made contact with AGL, Ausgrid. I've even gone out beyond the race partners into Energy Australia and stuff. I will then try and get out and talk to all of their UX people and their customer research people to look at what people are doing and how people are doing.
I'm going to give an example of not who we should collaborate with, but in the neighbourhood battery space, I think it's a really key collaboration partnership is between DNSPs and local councils or another trusted community organisation. So we can't do it without DNSPs. They're gonna end up owning most of them, but I don't think it will work well without those partnerships with trusted people within the community and in particular local councils.
A total wildcard.
Yep.
You looked at developers, purely because I know one, and they're looking at developing Bradfield, and they're this huge thing. Wow, why are we not building cities of the future?
I have spoken to some developers. The ones that I've spoken to, I'd be interested to hear more about the ones you've worked with, don't quite get the community side of it. So see it more as a financial part of the suburb.
Yep.
And I think it's missing a little bit the opportunity in neighbourhood batteries, which is this thing that people are so engaged in with that scale of technology, which is something that's not so big that they can't see it. It's not so in their house, so you have to be stressed about it, but it's just sitting there in your suburb, and it's what we've heard is that people really like the idea of engaging with it and it becoming a sort of community asset. And from the developers I've spoken to, they didn't really get that. It's more of an economic model, but yeah, be very keen to hear of others, and I'm sure there are people who would get it, and that might be a good idea. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's the end of the session. Thank you for the outstanding presentations.
Thank you to the chair.
Thank you.